My parents called me a burden after I took care of them for years, so I left, took their medical insurance off, and vanished forever. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for most of my life, I was told family comes first. It was like a law in our house, spoken quietly, enforced harshly. My father wasn't affectionate, and my mother only showed warmth when she needed something. But I was the eldest, so I was expected to understand, to lead by example, even if no one ever led me. I grew up knowing that love in our family had conditions, and I never quite met them. When I was 19, my dad got laid off from the auto plant. The stress made him bitter, and eventually it turned him mean. Then my mom's health took a hit. Arthritis so bad she couldn't even open a jar. I was in college then, juggling night classes and a part-time job at a hardware store. But when things got worse at home, I dropped half my courses and picked up another shift. I told myself it was temporary. That temporary turned into nearly a decade. I'd wake up at 6 a.m., make their breakfast, remind mom to take her pills, rush to work, come home, pay the bills, do the dishes, then study whatever bits I could before collapsing into bed. My friends drifted. My girlfriend left. But I kept going. Because every time I tried to step back, my parents would say things like, "Don't forget who fed you all these years," or "Zach's not built for this, you are." Zach is my younger brother. He's 2 years younger, sleeps in till noon, and hasn't held a job longer than a month. But he's charming. Always has been. The kind of guy who could crash the car and still convince everyone it wasn't his fault. My parents adore him. I don't remember the last time they said thank you to me, or even called me by my name without barking a chore right after. But I stayed, because that's what the good son does, until one day something shifted, and once it did, I couldn't unsee it. Looking back, I can't remember a time love wasn't tied to performance. If I brought home an A, I got a nod. If I won a school award, maybe a half-hearted good job between TV commercials. But if I ever questioned my parents, if I asked why they let Zach skip school, or why I had to do both our chores, I was labeled disrespectful or ungrateful. I learned early that obedience was the only form of love they understood. Zach, on the other hand, was effortless. He could lie about doing his homework, charm his way out of punishment, and somehow still get rewarded. I remember once, in high school, he crashed my mom's car while skipping class. My parents grounded me for not being a better influence. That night, Zach came into my room laughing, holding a slice of cake they gave him to cheer him up. They never once said the words golden child, but they didn't have to. I became the default fixer. The one who stayed up all night building a science project from scratch. The one who covered when Zach forgot to feed the dog. The one who kept quiet when Dad started yelling after too many beers. It wasn't just expected, it was demanded. Every choice I made was to keep the peace, to earn some invisible currency that never seemed to accumulate. Sometimes I'd test it. Say no to a chore. Come home late. Push back when something felt unfair. The silence that followed was always louder than any scream. They'd walk around me like I didn't exist. Plates would be served, 3, not 4. They'd talk over me at dinner. My father once muttered, "Act like a stranger, be treated like one," so I folded. I learned to comply. I told myself this was just how love worked in our family, but deep down, that silence started growing teeth, and one night, it finally bit back. When my mom's arthritis got worse and Dad's memory started slipping, I stepped up without hesitation. There was no family meeting, no shared responsibility, just this silent agreement. I would handle it. I started tracking her medications on a spreadsheet. Alarms for every pill, blood pressure logs, weekly grocery lists with anti-inflammatory foods she couldn't even pronounce. For Dad, it was memory tests, gentle reminders, repeating stories 10 times a day just to keep him calm, bathing him on the days he forgot how to use soap, reassuring him when he looked at me with panic in his eyes and asked, "Where's your mother?" Every week bled into the next. My alarm would ring at 6 a.m., and I wouldn't sit down until midnight. Somewhere along the line, I stopped being a son and became a full-time caregiver with no pay. No breaks, no end in sight. I started slipping at work, missing deadlines, zoning out in meetings, arriving late with half-shaved cheeks and wrinkled clothes. My boss pulled me aside and said, "You look like you haven't slept in a month." He wasn't wrong. I hadn't. My girlfriend left after 8 months of rain-checked plans and missed birthdays. My friends stopped calling. At first, they'd say, "Let me know if you can get away for a drink." but I never could. Eventually, they stopped asking. I'd see them posting pictures from weddings, hikes, dinner parties, and I'd just scroll past with numb eyes. Every now and then, late at night, I'd whisper to myself, "What about me?" But that voice always felt selfish, ungrateful. I'd slap it down with thoughts like, "You're strong. You can handle this. Zach can't. They need you more." That lie became a blanket I wrapped myself in for years, until one day, even that blanket couldn't keep out the cold. There were moments I'd crack, just slightly. I'd sit at the kitchen table, dead-eyed after a 14-hour shift and say something like, "I'm burning out. I can't do this alone." And every time my parents would twist it. "We never asked you to stay," my mom would say, folding laundry like I hadn't just said I was drowning. "No one forced you to sacrifice your life." My dad would chime in with a scoff, "Zach's out there living. You could have done the same if you wanted it bad enough." That line gutted me every time. Zach has a life, why don't you? I started to feel like I was going insane. Like the decade I'd spent keeping this family afloat was invisible. They spoke to me like I'd made all of this up, like caregiving was a lifestyle I just happened to choose for fun. Then came the moment that broke the illusion. Was cleaning out the drawer in the dining room, the one stuffed with old mail, expired coupons, receipts. I found a thick envelope labeled Zach Emergency Only. Inside were check stubs, bank slips, and handwritten notes. $500 here, $1,000 there. Money sent to him over the past 2 years while I was behind on rent. Rent I was paying because I was too busy taking care of them to work full-time. I remember holding the envelope like it was radioactive. My heartbeat climbed into my throat. When I showed it to them, my mom didn't flinch. She just said he needed help. "You don't understand what he's going through." And my dad? He looked past me like I was a stranger accusing his real son of theft. That night, I sat on the porch and realized I wasn't their hero. I was their fallback. And worse, I was starting to think they liked it that way. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got the call. My cousin Jake, who I hadn't spoken to in months, texted me out of nowhere. "You heard about Zach?" I hadn't. I was in the middle of ordering my parents' prescriptions and cleaning up after one of Dad's memory lapses. I replied, "No, what now?" Jake sent me the link. Local man arrested in fraud scheme involving over $200,000 in investor losses. There was Zach's smug face all over the news. Turns out his real estate startup wasn't real at all. It was a glorified Ponzi scheme. Fake contracts, false promises, high returns that never existed. And investors, some of them our neighbors, had started pressing charges. I stared at the screen so long my coffee went cold in my hand. I stormed into the living room. Article pulled up on my phone and demanded answers. My mom's face went pale. My dad didn't even try to lie. He just said he needed help. He made a mistake. That's when I noticed the stack of letters on the table. Attorney mail, court notices, payment plans. "You knew," I said, my voice shaking. "You've known for months. And you didn't tell me?" Silence. "How are you even paying for this?" More silence. I tore open one of the envelopes. Inside was a payment slip linked to a $75,000 personal loan. I checked the signatures. They'd co-signed it. Behind my back. That's why the bills had quietly become mine. Why every time I asked for help, they dodged it. They were funneling money into Zach's legal mess while I kept the lights on. And when I finally snapped, when the betrayal punched through my chest and spilled out of my mouth, my dad had the audacity to say, "Family doesn't abandon each other in hard times." I looked at him, this man who raised me on silence and guilt, and I didn't feel anger. I felt the terrifying clarity of betrayal. And in that moment, something inside me stopped forgiving. After that day, something inside me shut off. I didn't argue anymore. Didn't question. Didn't even care. I just went through the motions. Wake up, make breakfast, sort medications, drive to appointments. Numb routine like muscle memory performing for an audience that didn't even look up from the TV. My body started betraying me before my mind did. Migraines that felt like knives behind my eyes. Tremors in my hands when I tried to write. My jeans hung loose. I'd lost nearly 15 pounds in a month. I'd stare into the bathroom mirror at hollow cheeks and dull eyes and think, this can't be what living looks like. No one noticed. One evening, after Dad had another accident and I was scrubbing his clothes in the sink, I caught my reflection in the window. My hands were red and raw, the water gray with soap and sweat. Mom's voice called faintly from the living room, complaining about the channel. And all I could think was, if I died right now, they'd only care because no one would do the laundry. That thought terrified me and freed me. That night, I sat on the porch long after the house went quiet. The air smelled like rain, heavy and metallic. My brain didn't spin with guilt for once. It just whispered one sentence over and over. You can leave. But leaving wasn't simple. My name was on everything. Their insurance, the car, the bills, even the house phone. They had tangled me into every corner of their lives like ivy wrapping around stone. So I started small. One quiet step at a time, a new bank account, a new email, a few extra shifts at work. It wasn't escape yet. But for the first time in years, it felt like direction. And I didn't tell a soul. The explosion didn't come during a crisis. It came during a Tuesday morning argument over something stupid. Zach had a court date that day, and my mom expected me to drive her across town to be there. I told her I couldn't. I had a shift I couldn't miss, and we were already behind on the electricity bill. She slammed her coffee mug down so hard it cracked. Of course, you always have something more important than your own family. I kept my voice calm, controlled. You know I've been covering everything for months. I'm exhausted, Mom. I can't be everywhere. She turned, eyes sharp and venomous. You act like you're some kind of martyr. We never asked you to sacrifice anything. I just stared at her. You're the one ruining your life, not us. No one told you to give up your friends or your job. You chose that. And frankly, she paused and I could feel the weight of the next words before they even landed. You're a burden. I didn't move, didn't flinch. But inside, I felt something splinter. All those years, I'd held the weight of their lives on my back, skipping meals, skipping sleep, giving up relationships, birthdays, dreams. All the guilt I swallowed to keep this broken family stitched together, and in one breath, she reduced it to inconvenience. I nodded. Just once. Then I turned and walked out of the room. No slamming doors. No shouting. Just silence, and the hum of the refrigerator filling the space where something sacred used to be. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But in that moment, something in me stopped working, not physically. Not even mentally, it was something deeper. Something like faith, and I knew then. I'd never get it back. After that day, I stopped trying to be understood. No more explanations. No more arguments. I smiled when they spoke, nodded when they complained, and kept my answers short. But inside, I'd already left. I began documenting everything. Every appointment, prescription, bill, and payment. I built folders of proof, what I'd handled, what I'd paid, what I no longer would. I took photos of receipts, copied their medical files, even recorded phone calls with insurance agents. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. Quietly, I started transferring everything back into their names. The electricity bill, the gas account, the mortgage auto pay. Every thread that tied me to that house, I untangled one by one. I created a P.O. box 2 towns over, listed it as my mailing address, and rerouted anything personal there. When I contacted a state social worker anonymously, I found out something that made my chest ache and burn at the same time. They qualified for full-time home care support. They'd been eligible for years. They just never applied because I'd always been there. They're free labor. They're built-in safety net. So I filled out the forms for them, signed their names, and left the approval letters on the kitchen counter under a single post-it. You'll be okay. Before leaving, I typed out a 10-page document titled, How to Manage Without Me. It listed everything: doctor names, grocery days, medication reminders, step-by-step foolproof. It wasn't an act of love. It was closure. My way of saying I did my part. The very last thing I did was call their insurance company. I verified coverage, then asked the representative to remove my name as their secondary contact. When she confirmed the change, I hung up the phone and sat in silence. For the first time in my life, I belonged to no one, and it felt terrifyingly right. I left on a Thursday morning, bags packed. Phone off. Bank accounts closed. Every trace of me carefully unlinked from the life I'd built for them. I drove for hours, past familiar highways, until the skyline of a small city 2 states over rose on the horizon. I started using my middle name, new driver's license, new email, a new life I hadn't touched in over a decade. The silence hit me immediately. The kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes you realize just how loud your old life had been. For a few hours, I expected guilt to wash over me. Expected the walls of the apartment to echo with screams I'd carry in my mind forever, but it didn't. Instead, I felt relief. Pure, unfiltered relief. My body, exhausted for years, finally unclenched. Sleep came in full nights instead of 3-hour stretches. I bought groceries and cooked meals for myself instead of running to their pantry. I went jogging again, feeling my legs remember their strength. I ate without counting the calories in case someone else needed it more. For the first time, I was the center of my own life. I didn't answer the 47 voicemails. Didn't return the 23 emails. I didn't look at the missed calls on my phone. I just existed, and existing was enough. Sometimes I'd walk past a cafe and smell fresh bread and think about Mom's kitchen. A pang would hit me, but it was fleeting. I realized that peace wasn't about forgetting. It was about letting go. And for the first time in nearly 10 years, I understood what freedom felt like until one afternoon. A familiar name flickered in my peripheral vision, a name I thought I'd left behind, and it made my heart skip a beat. Weeks later, my phone buzzed with a message from my cousin Jake. "Your parents are telling people you abandoned them and stole their savings," it read. I stared at it for a long time, letting the words sink in. Lies. Outrageous, audacious lies. A mix of guilt, anger, and something darker, satisfaction bubbled in my chest. But I didn't respond. I couldn't. I had no words for people who didn't know the whole story, and then I watched from the distance of my new life. The unraveling began. Zach got arrested again, this time for attempting to cash forged checks. Utilities in my parents' house started getting cut off because the bills I'd quietly transferred back had been ignored. Distant relatives stepped in, waving their hands, pretending they'd always been there to help. People began asking questions. Whispers turned to truth. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years started messaging me. Apologies, half-hearted regrets, acknowledgement of what I had endured. Some still stayed silent, choosing their side of the story. I read the messages. I deleted most of them. I let a few linger. Not for closure, but to remind myself I had been right to leave. I didn't feel victorious. Not really. But I felt free. Free from the constant manipulation. Free from the invisible labor, from guilt as currency, from being their emotional punching bag. And as much as they tried to rewrite the past, I knew one thing. I wasn't coming back. No phone call. No letter. No last-minute apology would pull me into that life again. I had vanished. And the world, finally, had to deal with the truth without me. And for the first time, I could breathe. I started seeing a therapist a few weeks after moving, sitting in that quiet office. Letting someone else hear the story I'd bottled for years was both terrifying and liberating. I spoke about the exhaustion, the endless obligations, the constant feeling of being invisible. I spoke about Zach, about my parents, about the word burden tattooed into my mind. And for the first time, I let myself cry without shame. Work became a sanctuary. A small IT support role, quiet office, minimal drama. I set routines I actually enjoyed. Morning coffee at the corner cafe, walks in the park, weekly hikes that reminded me my body could belong to me. I started reading again, novels I had shelved years ago because family responsibilities came first. One morning, I caught my reflection in the glass of a bookstore window. I smiled, and it wasn't forced. It felt like me. For the first time in a decade, I recognized myself. I adopted a dog, Rusty, a golden retriever with soft, trusting eyes. His unconditional companionship reminded me what care could feel like when it wasn't transactional, when it wasn't tied to guilt or expectation. Occasionally, someone would ask about my family. I'd pause, glance down at Rusty, and simply say, "No, not anymore." And I didn't feel the need to explain. No one had to understand. Therapy helped me unpack years of guilt, trauma, and self-denial. I started journaling again, not as a record of duties, but as a way to reclaim my voice. Each sentence, each memory became proof that I existed outside of their control. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. And in these small, deliberate choices, I built a life that was mine. A life where I wasn't invisible, where I wasn't the scapegoat, and where I could finally breathe without apology. For the first time, I felt like home wasn't a place, it was a feeling I carried inside me. They called me a burden. But the truth is, they were mine. The words float over a montage of my new life. I'm sitting at a worn wooden desk, pen scratching across the pages of a journal I never thought I'd fill again. The camera pans to Rusty trotting ahead on a forest trail, tail wagging, ears flopping with every step. Laughter spills from a small gathering of friends at a local cafe, and for the first time, I notice how light it feels to laugh without obligation, without guilt, without constant tension curling at the edges. Sometimes, I pull out the 10-page guide I left behind for my parents, How to Manage Without Me. It sits quietly in a drawer. I don't need it, but I keep it just in case. A reminder that care doesn't always have to come with sacrifice. Some people don't deserve closure. They deserve distance. I've learned that distance can be a kind of freedom. It can be quiet, it can be restorative, and it can finally let the air fill your lungs properly. I think back to the mornings I spent running on empty, the nights spent doing laundry and logging medications, the endless years of bending myself to a family that would never bend for me, and I realize now, they were never my responsibility in the way I thought. I only believed I had to carry them. I look out the window as the sun sets over the small city I now call home. Rusty curled at my feet and feel a kind of peace I didn't know existed. "You're allowed to save yourself," I say softly, as though I'm telling it to the kid I once was. Even if they call it betrayal. The screen fades to black, leaving only that truth lingering. No apologies. No explanations. Just the quiet power of reclaiming your life, step by step, and realizing that sometimes survival is the only justice you need. I was never the burden, and for the first time, I am entirely, completely free.